and they're all going to look at this question from different perspectives. And I think what I'll do is I'll just quickly introduce each of them, and then we'll get going. So first is Helge Elisabeth Zeitler. Helge is a policy coordinator with the European Commission's Directorate General for Environment, working in particular on UNEP-related issues and the 2030 Agenda, as well as on wildlife trafficking. Prior to her current post, Helge worked in the Commission on Environmental Crime and at the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda as Special Representative to the President. And after that, we have Paulina Shilbeva, thank you, for the Center for Support of Indigenous Peoples of the North. And Paulina represents the Selkup Indigenous People of Siberia. She is the Director for Legal Information Center, the Regional Coordinator of Indigenous Peoples for the region of Russia and Eastern Europe, and a member of the Center for Support of Indigenous Peoples of the North, Russia. She participates in the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. After that, Michael Stanley Jones, who's a program manager for UNEP UNDP Poverty and Environment Initiative. And Michael has held this since 2014, based in Nairobi. He is responsible for communications, knowledge management, and outreach within the Poverty Environment Facility, the global management hub of the initiative. Outside of the UN, Michael has worked in academia, civil society, and the public sector. He's been a long-time advocate of strengthening public access to information and the right to know. He's a native of California, and we're pleased to have Michael. After that, Ashok Khoshla, who is really probably one of the reasons many of us are here, one of the real heroes of the International Environmental Agenda, the Sustainable Development Agenda and Conservation Agenda. And Dr. Khoshla has been one of the real inspirational leaders in the issues we've been talking about for over 30 years. He is the co-chair of the International Resource Panel of UNEP, a science policy interface set up by UNEP over 10 years ago. And then finally, Najib Saab is the Secretary General of the Arab Forum of Environment and Development and Editor-in-Chief of the Environment and Development magazine, an award-winning mass circulation Arabic monthly, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this month. And Najib is editor of annual reports on the state of the Arab environment, and the latest, which is due out in 2016, on achieving the SDGs in a changing Arab environment. So terrific panel, and we'll go first off to Helge, and they'll talk between 7 to 10 minutes each, and then we'll have a discussion. So welcome, thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone, and thanks very much for inviting me to this panel. I mean, the topic is very broad, and Scott has given us a large range of options how to tackle it. So you will hear a lot of very different perspectives, I guess. And I thought when I looked at the choices I got from Scott that the topic of institutions and how they are a pathway to sustainable development is something very interesting and very, very important. I mean, I think, first of all, what is really a fantastic achievement is, in my view, the recognition of this role of institutions in SDG 16. I mean, to have clear criteria of what institutions should look like to achieve sustainable development, that they have to be effective, accountable, inclusive, and that there's global agreement on that is a fantastic achievement as such. It's acknowledged for all levels, and it's acknowledged also in the Goal 16, this importance of access to justice. And I mean, these are all such very, very important points, not only as such and as a SDG as such, but also as a means of implementation, and that is recognized also in the Addis Action Agenda. So I think this as such is a fantastic step forward, and because we can have many different concepts of how we look at sustainable development and what exactly we mean with that, how we want to get there. But I think the role of institutions as such is recognized by everyone, and it just cannot work without. And the fact that we focus now a lot on partnerships and how to bring other actors in, business, private sector as such, is of course very important, and that's maybe a very transformative element also, but it doesn't take away that the state institution as such will always remain to play a key role, and that's why we need to focus on them and on having them functioning well and be up to standards of good governance. So maybe just a couple of thoughts about, or also from an EU perspective, of points about this inclusiveness and the importance of effective, accountable institutions. And then I would briefly give some thoughts about what institutions have to do now to take into account and how to adapt to the agenda, and what things we could think about when we try to make sure that they are up to what is needed now to implement the agenda. I mean, first of all, of course, the inclusiveness of the institutions. I mean, it's all about how institutions engage with stakeholders, how they give others a voice to be brought into the process of policy making or of regulation. So, I mean, they have to enable others to play a role. So they have a very important enabling function. And now to just give an example from the EU, I mean, we have a big new approach, or an approach that is called better regulation. There has been a lot of discussion about that. What do we mean with better regulation? Better for whom? Better as what? What does it actually mean? But a key element, and I think it's very important because it's a commitment, is this engagement by stakeholders throughout the process, really from the first idea of a new initiative. Then we publish a roadmap for initiatives on which people can comment. Then comes the impact assessment. There's again involvement. And so throughout the stage until the adoption, we really want to see the feedback from stakeholders. And I think that's a very important part. And I mean, there's always room for improvement. But I think the fact that there is a clear standard to do that and a commitment to do that at political level also enables then the stakeholders to hold us accountable and to say, well, you haven't lived up to your own standards, you haven't done what you promised to do, or you do it just as a label. And so there's even, I've seen there's a better regulation watchdog we have now who does nothing else but check that we are actually living up to what we promised we would do. So I think mechanisms like that are very important for this inclusiveness. Then I would like just to say a couple of words about the justice side, because I think the justice system is such a fundamental element, because it not only enables, of course, people to get their rights put into practice, but it also is an enabler for all parts of sustainable development. And I mean, we have acknowledged that in the EU, for example, in a context which I find quite interesting of economic growth strategy. So it's a big strategy, Europe 2020, that is focused really on achieving sustainable growth in the EU. But the fact of an effective justice system is one of the indicators there, and it's one of the important things that member states have to focus on, because it's clear that we cannot have any sustainable growth without a justice system. And I mean, I don't even need to mention that for environmental issues, the effective justice system is crucial. So we've had for the last years, every year, a justice scoreboard that assesses the effectiveness of the justice systems of all member states. It puts it public. That's always very sensitive. Some of the findings, which include also perception of independence of justice, a bit like the Transparency International Index on corruption. Some of the findings are very sensitive. Member states are not happy, but it's a very important instrument, and we've seen also improvements over the last years. So mechanisms like that force accountability also on the effectiveness of a justice system is something that I think is really essential to have if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, because I can hardly think of any of the SDGs that would not require an effective justice system to have it enforced and implemented in practice. So these are just 2 points on institutions at national level. And now if we look at the Agenda 2030 and what we need to get this integrated spirit, this transformational spirit we always talk about, put in practice, I think it's extremely difficult, and I think every country that works now on implementing the agenda can confirm that, when we see that also at the EU level. There's on the one hand, we look from the EU side as a donor region at the international level, how we can support implementation of the agenda through our development policies. There, of course, we have different instruments, and I think there it's a bit easier. We can use instruments like mainstreaming of environmental and climate policies. We've just actually published new guidelines that adapt to the agenda and really make it not just it's really mainstreaming into all sorts of programming of the EU development support. I think that's a big step forward, which of course also requires then on the other side of the recipient countries that there is a similar commitment to living up to this idea of integration, so that, I mean, not only we come with our suggestions for integrated approach in our programming, but that this is matched also on the other side with the similar ideas of not doing things in silos. Then another instrument that I think is important, then if we talk about the internal, so for the EU now, what we do at the EU level to implement the agenda, there are different things to look at, and they are all very politically sensitive and not easy to get through. I think what is really needed is some sort of a structure quite at a central level. You would need something not in a specific ministry, not in the environment ministry or in one other specific ministry, that takes care of the implementation of the agenda, because then you will always have it being perceived as an environmental topic or a social topic or whatever. You would really need something that is at the central institution, the chancellery, whatever is there, the presidential office, whatever you have. And then we do, at least in the EU, usually we do impact assessments. We assess initiatives as to their environmental impacts, their social impacts, etc. And I mean, one could, of course, think about mechanisms how to adjust this to a sort of SDG proofing. I mean, what can we really say that we do nothing, at least, that undermines any of the SDGs, that goes against what we've committed to do? And ideally, does it even move them forward? So it should be a bit of a double checking. But again, it's a process that needs time to be implemented. And another area I think that could be playing a very central role for this is the financing, at least on, I mean, most governments, and we do it also for the EU, we do multi-annual financial planning. And we do it on a 7 years cycle. And of course, that is the crucial moment then when you set out your financial planning for the next 7 years, to see how you can there integrate the agenda and how you can ensure that, again, you don't plan your budget in a way that you risk in one area to undermine what you try to achieve in another. So these are really the key moments, basically, in a policy-making cycle at national level, where you could try to make progress with the SDGs. I can say for the EU that we are still in the process of figuring out how to do that best, and we hope we can move forward with this in the next month. But I'm happy to discuss that further, and I think I would leave it at that, maybe, as introductory remarks.
Very good. Thank you very, very much for that. That's excellent, actually. So that's a great way to start. And so we'll come back. I'll come back with questions after we hear from everyone. So thanks, Helge. So Paulina, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. My name is Paulina. Again, I'm indigenous from Central Siberia. And English is not my native languages. I will try to speak understandable. For indigenous peoples is also very active participants and partners for contribution to sustainable development. And for indigenous people, sustainable development goals in sustainable development, it's for understanding, it's preserving our resources and our land for future generation. It's first of all. We know that some countries not happy of many goals in CDG goals, not comfortable for some countries. It's goals about environment. But for indigenous peoples, it's is it goals? It's basic of life, and we are very regret that we are not be indicated in relevant targets. I mean, we have not specific reference to indigenous peoples in some specific targets. Very important for us. When we working before CDG's goals was adopted, we have very activity work, and we concentrated in main areas for us, like need for disaggregation of data, rights to land, territories and resources, free, prior, informed consent, special measures to include access to food and educational and other, access to justice and redress mechanism, and participants and representative of decision making in relevant bodies and all levels. But as a result now, if we talk about CDGs, what we have right now, indigenous peoples, we have in the Sustainable Development Goals, indigenous people referenced 6 times only. 3 times it's a in a political declaration, 2 in the targets under goal 2, it's 0 hunger, 1 target 2.3, and 1 goal 4, it's about education. And 1 in a section about review that calls for indigenous people's participation. It means that we have only 2 goals who have specific reference to indigenous peoples. Goals number 2 and goals number 4. Education and 0 hunger. And we have 4 indicators. It's 2 indicators about land rights, 1 indicator about small-scale farmers, and 1 indicator access to education. Of course, we understand that apart from the direct reference, many of CDGs and associated targets, it's relevant for indigenous peoples. But for our problem now that we have not specific reference, because some countries where live indigenous peoples, it's a big problem. If you have specific reference to indigenous can participate in these processes. Some government can say it's not for you. It's okay, you can, of course, you can do in some work, but it's not for you specifically. Yes, and we don't know yet right now, do indigenous people participate in or not in the national programs, in the national level, in the national justice on CDGs? We don't know yet because it's only started now. We have very nice experience in the regional level, how we work in regional in Eastern Europe and Central Asia with FAO. But it's a little bit, I'm told about this a little bit later. How indigenous peoples' engagement in the post-2015 development process can be more stronger. We think and we hope on collaborative partnership between government and indigenous peoples, and not state actors. Of course, all stakeholders. We mean different programs, consultation, monitoring. We need to participate in these processes. I think the real need organizing multi-stakeholders consultation in a national level. It's very important that different countries that organize some multi-stakeholders consultation, different dialogue with indigenous peoples, with different stakeholders. We needed capacity building workshop with local authority participation, because sometimes local authority not understand what is it CDGs and how they can work with CDGs, and why indigenous people, or why pastoralists, or why some environment organization must participate in this process. They not understand this. We needed round table between government, indigenous peoples, and other stakeholders in the national level. It's a first of all. Only in this case, we think that only in this case, indigenous peoples will have chance to participate as a part and as a partner in this process. Of course, we need resources. It's very important for all of us. To promote national capacity building, including learning materials. We should note that training materials, it's very important, but training materials, it's only in English languages. Mm-hmm. It's a big problem, because if you see our website, sustainabledevelopment.org, it's only English languages on website. How my people can use this website or materials from this website? It's a big issue for us. We needed all materials, training, all publication, maybe not all, but very important. with case study, with good examples on a national, regional, local level, in an international level. We needed this for all 6 UN languages. It's a minimum. Sometimes we need publication and training material in indigenous languages, in the local community languages. It's very important, but it's a big issue for funding. Of course, we understand this. And one more, if we talk about training materials, we must remember about adaptation these materials for the local level, for the local authorities, adaptation languages for understanding for local authorities. And this is very important if some materials will be with good examples or with good case studies for achievement of CDGs in different levels. It's very important for all. Of course, for participation and we need participation and representation and decision-making process in a relevant body. We talked about this. And recognition and full and effective participation in indigenous and in all sustainable development discussions and decision. Right now, I know that some countries from Latin America and from government of India using some indigenous very good examples for sustainable conservation, for sustainable development of land and sustainable use of ecosystem, territories, natural resources in a national level, in a national plan. Countries from Latin American was include these case studies for national, some countries for national programs for sustainable development. It's very, very important. I think indigenous peoples have very nice examples for collective actions, for monitoring monitoring in the communities, on ecosystem and other. This is we can use for different programs and in a national level. Yeah, and before I'm finished, I wanted to told, maybe you remember in last year, a Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues has made several recommendations about Agenda Post-15, about indigenous peoples. It was really very nice recommendations for parties and for United Nations bodies. It's a recommendation about justice, traditional knowledge, land rights, data disaggregation, free, prior, informed consent. It's very important and very much, very nice recommendation. And we hope really that this recommendation will listen and understanding for, and maybe including in national programs and international programs too for sustainable development goals. Yeah, thank you.
Paulina, thank you very much. So we've had now both Helga and Paulina both talk about the importance of justice as one of the issues and as central to the SDGs. So for those of you thinking about discussions or questions. So Michael, over to you, please.
Thank you. I want to break the glass barrier a bit during this next segment. Could we first, we were instructed, and Scott, thank you for this guidance, not to use PowerPoint. So I promise not to use PowerPoint. Can we unlock the screen? Because I would like at midpoint in this intervention to show you a photo essay, or at least some photos that will illustrate one of the key themes. That's not the photo. That's okay. Go forward one, and we'll stop there. Thank you. So I wanted to first ask if you've had a chance to visit the main conference hall of UNEA. This would be opposite Saal 1, opposite conference room 1, where you were meeting this morning. On the opposite side of the foyer of the garden, there's the main hall where UNIA delegates are going to meet beginning on Monday. Have you had a chance to see it? Right? Did anything strike you as you walked by and looked at the decor? Well, I was struck that along the interior, there's a gallery of photos of people. The decor is of images from people around the planet, representative faces from our planet. And that reminded me that one of the key messages of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development is that it should be people-centered. Some say people-centric, but what it means is that people lie at the core of the new agenda. Now, alongside this orientation towards humanity is the promise that we will leave no one behind. That was in the Declaration, I believe. And we've heard this catchphrase. To leave no one behind means that development, the paradigm of development, is no longer a matter of tracking growth in the aggregate. A people-centric sustainable development, a model of development that we've now embraced, some would say also inclusive green economy in that model, has to care for those who have so often in the past been left behind by development measures. The marginalized communities of our planet, the traditionally disempowered peoples, often in many societies, women and girls, the gender gap, and the poor. And I think the poor has received perhaps the lion's share of attention in the SDG debates. Leaving no one behind means we are addressing inequality, inequities in power, and we ensure that the new paradigm of sustainable development cares about the distributional impacts of how economies work as a matter of distributional justice. How, at a practical level, do we ensure that development leaves no one behind and addresses the needs and aspirations of the poor, of the 800+ million people who did not get lifted out of poverty during the 15-year MDG exercise, and the nearly 4 billion people of the planet who are at risk of sliding into poverty? As we've made tremendous progress. I've spoken abstractly, talking about distributional justice and equity. We've heard earlier that we in the international community will try not to work in silos, and that's another catchphrase. My own agencies, the UNDP and the United Nations Environment Program, the co-facilitators of the Poverty Environment Initiative, often speak about delivering as one. We are trying to break the silos between development agency and an environment agency and work across this barrier that's an institutional one. But again, in speaking abstractly about implementing the Sustainable Development Goals as one, or addressing distributional justice, addressing equity, I feel that I'm using the language of my own community and not actually speaking to the people that we are tasked now to address. Those that we don't want to leave behind are left behind by the very rhetoric that I've now used for the past 3 minutes. And so to break out of that, I'd like to tell a story about a trip that we went on, 6 of us from Nairobi UN agencies, at the invitation of a rural women's community empowerment organization called the Tana Community Initiative. Tana in the Kamba language means friendly. And so you'll see some friendly people, but you'll also see an illustration of what kinds of issues from the ground up communities are addressing, which we translate into the language of Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm going to, I think I'll step over there for a minute. I said I would break the glass. It's not a glass ceiling here, but it's maybe a glass wall. And join you there. This is a trip to northeastern Machakos County, It's more fun when I get to push the button. That we took 2 weeks ago at the invitation of this community-based organization. Here we're greeted by the host. Rose in the center of the photo is downstairs. You can meet her here at this conference. This one? No, I see. Yeah. You got it? No. Yeah, back. This one. Now. It doesn't go. It's only one picture. Okay, we have them on the desktop. All of this was set up beforehand. This community in northeastern Machakos County in Kenya is about 100 kilometers from Nairobi. It's a community with no electrical grid, no piped water system, no roads to speak of, they're paths. It's a subsistence farming region. And during our tour, open? I should have let you do this, it's easier. The district chief and the community leaders took us sand extraction. Okay, you're going to do them all. Yeah. To visit their local water supply. This is a tributary of the Tana River, which is the 1,000-kilometer long river that feeds 1/3 of Kenyans for drinking water. And this is in the upper Tana Basin, above the reservoirs that store much of that river's water. And what you see in this is a classic illustration of how the mismanagement of a natural resource is immiserating a community, leaving them behind. This rocky bottom of the river is not natural. What has happened is, over 30 years, this embankment of sand has been carted away for urban development. This is an example of over-extraction of sand as a natural resource. The sand that used to be in this river, in this riparian corridor, provided the drinking water supply for the villagers during dry season. Sand is an amazing reservoir for moisture. And in hot and semi-arid regions such as Machakos County, without the sand, the water either evaporates or it rapidly runs down the course of the stream. This is the wet season. This is how it looks when there's heavy rainfall, where there had been heavy rains the week before we came. In the dry season, this will go barren. There's another image of that. There is in Kenya no regulation about the extraction of sand from riparian ecosystem. The ecosystem service, which is water storage and retention, and the drinking water and other water it provides to the community, is not accounted for in the economic calculations made when the sand is extracted. Simply, what they locally called sandboys or syndicates have come and systematically are stripping the rural regions of a resource that's vital for the survival of these communities. That's a classic poverty environment nexus, a poverty environment issue, where you have development which does contribute to an economy, but which has a distributional impact on a vulnerable community, in this case, a subsistence farming community. We in the Poverty Environment Initiative try to address these types of conflicts, not this one in particular. This one, UNEP has been studying the Tana River for 3 years and did not recognize so far that there is a problem with resource management of sand. But this type of conflict, where a natural resource's mismanagement has an impact that's negative on a vulnerable community, Or to put it around the other way, where improving the management of natural resources and the environment can have a positive impact on a community that otherwise has been left behind by economic growth and development. Kenya is a middle-income country. It's not least developed. And yet 1 in 3 Kenyans lack access to clean and healthy water supply. So this distributional issue, the inequities of an economy that is growing and growing rapidly. I think Kenya's economy is growing about 6% per annum now, perhaps a little faster. So one of the strongest growing economies in Africa. Provides a case study in how to address inequality and bring the community forward. We do that by working at the national level on guidance, on policies. We do economic analysis. We do public environmental expenditure reviews, reviewing budgets. And we help governments turn around their patterns of regulation and investment to ensure that they are pro-poor and pro-environment, improving on both dimensions, which helps us achieve and helps countries and communities achieve the agenda for 2030 development. I want to just end by saying, Paulina, we have a guidance document. It'll soon be available in Russian language. It's called, I'll hold it up, and then I will conclude. Can you advance one more slide? It captures 10 years of experience working in 30 countries in 4 regions, mainstreaming environment and climate for poverty reduction and sustainable development. And it is providing a blueprint of how to achieve the multiple objectives of the SDGs, working across agencies, across regions, across stakeholder groups.
Michael, thank you very much. That was great. So, Ashok, please, over to you.
I used to work for much of my misspent youth at the policy level. I was in the government and I was at UNEP, and I helped start this organization in 1972. And it was wonderfully rewarding to be able to do things that impacted large numbers of people in many parts of the world. But gradually I came to realize that while big organizations like international bodies and national governments mean well, they don't have the reach. They have the reach, but they don't have the grasp of the local community or household or the issues that people like the ones in the picture there face every day. So after many, many years in government and the UN, I realized that my job really was to find ways to develop institutions that basically would be able to make a difference to those people directly on the ground. When I left UNEP in 1982, my dream was to set up what is now called a social enterprise. At that time, there were no such things. It was an idea that everybody thought was completely crazy, to bring the goals and aspirations of what civil society, NGOs, voluntary organizations do, together with business-like methods, so that you could do these in a way that could be scaled up and would use the marketplace as a means of doing good. It was unacceptable in the economic theories of the 1980s and 90s to bring together business and social objectives. It sounds ridiculous now because we talk about social enterprise all the time, but at that time it was not something one could do. And in those 30 years, my own social enterprise called Development Alternatives has created some 2.5, 3 million livelihoods, has reduced literally hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon emission, has created water systems and energy systems and sanitation, which means toilets, for literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of households. Many of these numbers have been verified by independent organizations and governments. So to some extent, my theory in 1980 that you could apply business-like methods to social objectives, in a sense worked. We did this without capital. It was a bootstrap operation. I did get a very sizable and very, very generous grant from UNEP to get started. It was the first civil society grant that this organization made. But that was enough to keep me going for a year or two. It wasn't something that would bring me to this point 33 years later. That was because we actually tried very hard to develop business models that worked with specific kinds of social and environmental issues. All this time I was associated with the UN in many different ways, and the SDG process was something that I personally and my organization were very heavily involved with. Personally, because I'm chairman of the resource panel, and when SDG discussion started, what worried me the most and my fellow members of the panel was what is the implication for resources, natural resources. If we fulfill these wonderful SDGs, will we have destroyed the planet in the process? Where is the energy going to come from? Where is the water going to come from? It's absolutely essential, as Michael said, that leaving no one behind, improving the lives of all, needs access to resources. And the word access is very important there, because the rich automatically have it and the poor don't. Partly because they can't afford it, they don't have the purchasing power, partly because society and the economy have been constructed in such a way that they can't get it. It's either geographically remote or it's financially remote or whatever. So to some extent, the whole process of SDGs involved a guerrilla warfare from our panel, for example, to ensure that we didn't forget that the environmental resource base is not infinite, and once you start fulfilling human aspirations, which we really must, then you must do so in such a way that you also regenerate the environmental resource base. So, in fact, goals 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 are very much oriented towards these kinds of issues. The resource issue of SDGs is critically important. So I just want to begin by basically saying that while SDGs went way beyond the MDGs in bringing the North, the industrialized, the rich countries, into the process of doing good to society as well as to environment, but it didn't. The process didn't allow for a discussion on the root causes of why we have such problems, and what are the solutions that you have to remove. What are the root causes? The root causes are things we all know. Helge mentioned several of them institutionally. The way we compartmentalize knowledge in our sectors and our institutions is a major root cause. An even bigger root cause is economic thinking, by what Michael referred to as thinking about the aggregate and not thinking about the composition of development. It makes a lot of difference, in our opinion, in the opinion, I believe, of most of the people in this room, whether you have a $100 million economy with 90 million of those belonging to one person and 10 million to the others. But frankly, the economics profession doesn't believe that. The economics textbook, the very first textbook that you can read, basically ignores distributional aspects altogether. For them, it's all the same, whether it's spread throughout the economy or whether one person has all of it and the rest have nothing. Economic theories basically are constructed really to have to promote aggregate growth. And it's not growth that we need. It's transformation. It's human well-being that we need for all. And so these are various kinds of root issues. The nation state, which is a powerful concept. We've lived with it since 1648. It's a very, very important construct of global political arrangements, but it also has lots of limitations. Many of the issues that we're dealing with cannot be dealt with by a single state. They are global in nature. There are others that are universal, that are spread throughout the world, but basically they can essentially, they require a different form of thinking than we are allowed under the present political arrangements. One of the worst issues that I think constrains us is our inability to think beyond linear processes. We think basically that if we want to solve the water problem for someone, just give them more water. No, that's not true. There are lots of other things you've got to do. In order to get water, you have to have energy. Whether you dig it out of the ground or you transport it from somewhere. Energy and water, in fact, become almost synonymous. And so then you have to start thinking about the interactions, what we call the nexus, between different resources. The issues of trade-offs between getting more of one and therefore less of something else. The issue of synergies. And in the case of water and energy, there's tremendous synergies possible. And there are examples like the sand and the river, which, by the way, is a hidden scarcity problem around the world today, which has led really to enormous problems. There are now major constraints on construction now, just because of the lack of sand. In Singapore, they can't construct anymore. They had 2 islands in Indonesia, more or less, they'd bought, but they finished those. And now they have to actually manufacture sand equivalents from stone. In India, sand has become so scarce that there is a mafia. The head of a local government, a fairly senior official, was murdered not so long ago by the sand mafia because she tried to prevent them from taking it away from the riverbed. So we're talking about a world in which we want to satisfy everybody's needs, create sustainable livelihoods for everyone, but we don't recognize that there are resource constraints which we must get around. And we have to, and we can. We can with the right kind of innovation, with the right kinds of changes in our behavior patterns, right kinds of transformations in our lifestyles and our consumption patterns and our production systems. So there's a lot that can be done, and these underlie the SDGs. They're not visible, but they were talked about, of course, during the process of formulating the SDGs. But now we've got to actually do something about it. And frankly, neither big business nor big government, nor indeed the big international system is able to do much about that. This has to be done by communities and by local people. And the people who instigate them, who support them, which is civil society, which is the NGOs and the voluntary agencies and the women's groups. And that's what we hear about today. Stakeholders and the major groups is another one of the jargons that Michael was talking about, which hides the real activity that each one of us have to promote. So my feeling about the multiple pathways to SDGs is that we've actually now got to promote much harder thinking and work by communities and by the civil society that supports them. Now let me tell you the bad news. Civil society is not popular anymore. It's under a great deal of threat. I speak partly from my own country, where civil society is under massive, massive threat by governments who feel that they're inconvenient, that they prevent them from doing the things that make them get votes and so on. Civil society is against nuclear power. Civil society is against raping the forests, civil societies, very, very strongly of the view that indigenous people need to be given their rights as much as the richest and the most urban people. And governments don't want to hear that. They find it difficult to deal with this. So what do? They throw everything at NGOs to stop them from being useful or being constructively involved. I really think this is a very, very strong issue that is going to hinder, I hope not prevent, but is going to hamper the ability of governments, of nations and communities to fulfill the SDGs. So when we talk about multiple pathways, I really think we've got to think of what are the constraints we have to overcome and what are the means by which we will do that. I believe that the thing I started 33 years ago, a social enterprise, is one very important innovation that we need to spread around the world. And over the last 8 or 10 years, it's clear that many more people have chosen to follow that. The other kind of innovation is rediscovering technologies that got thrown out because at $1 a barrel of oil, who wanted steam engines? Who wanted calcium carbide lamps? Who was going to use the things that actually were benign and worked with nature? Now that the price of oil is sort of coming down a bit, it's going to be even harder than it used to be. But basically, it makes us, gives us an opportunity. Gives us an opportunity to look at how we do our transportation, our construction. I didn't bring a picture of my headquarters building, which I've been showing all over the place. You must have seen it last 2 days. But it's made entirely out of mud and recycled materials, out of industrial wastes like fly ash from power stations, like stone dust from mines. It uses about 60% less virgin material, and it embodied energy and operational energy use in this building is approximately 50% less than a normal one. Multinationals have asked to rent space in it. It's a very, very elegant building, but it shows that we can change things. Now, if you leave that to the UN or to your respective governments, it's not going to happen, because they've got the mindsets that the only way to be modern is to look like Dubai. You know, I mean, basically, that's not the future. So we believe that the kind of innovations needed, both in institutions and in technology, are not going to happen on their own. It's only going to happen if we build the capacity of each one of our countries to do this kind of research. So let me sort of close by saying the central issue in fulfilling Michael's dream of a world in which no one gets left behind, is the creation of sustainable livelihoods on a large scale. And sustainable livelihoods are very simple in one sense and very complex in another. Sustainable livelihoods are jobs or employment opportunities or entrepreneurial opportunities which create the ability of every individual to fulfill their basic needs and regenerate the environment in which they live. That's what a sustainable livelihood is. And you know, my organization has been doing work for 30-odd years, so it's a long time. But we're talking about millions. We're not talking about tens or hundreds of thousands. We're talking about very large numbers. And I think that can only be done by new kinds of institutions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So lots here I'm not going to try to come to right now. But Najib, over to you, and then we'll leave ourselves about 15 minutes for discussion.
I'll try to be as brief as possible to leave more time for discussion. After we heard about general matters which concern us all, I'll shift now to my region. I'll talk about the challenges and the prospects of achieving SDGs in the Arab countries where we operate, in the 22 countries. Why do I concentrate on this? Because that region in the last years was facing existential challenges. More than half of the region passed through wars and conflicts, and it continues through this. The remaining are facing big changes, especially due to the decline in the prices of oil. I was discussing with Ashok before. To me, the latter problem is not very bad. It offers opportunities, because it was very difficult for us, people like me and Ashok, to convince those people who had plenty of money to change. Now with less income, things are becoming easier. So we have opportunities in this regard. Now, I have some messages. The first one, it does not apply only to Arab countries, it applies to other regions. We cannot take the 22 Arab countries as a monolith, as one piece. Just imagine, when you say Arab countries, you have Qatar. It has the biggest ecological footprint per capita in the world. So if everybody consumes like an average Qatari, we shall need 6.6 planets. While Yemen, it's also a part of this Arab region, part of West Asia, very near to Qatar. And then if everybody consumes like an average Yemeni, even before their war now, you would need half a planet. So they under-consume, they need to consume more. So we cannot look at this region as one. Then we need to have our SDGs with priorities which fit every country and also which fit different parts of every country. So there should be national plans for implementation. They should follow certain guidelines, but we shouldn't have a prototype and oblige every country to go through it. My second message is that in our region, there are common challenges, and to face them, we need some measures, and for some governments, those measures don't sound like good music in the ears. They only would like to hear, we need more financial aid. We don't think this is the priority. First, in our region and in other regions, it's the same. You need effective participation from non-state actors. It is not there. Many times, government employees come to represent NGOs. So there are, government-created NGOs so that they justify they are coming to represent. The funniest thing, I was at the UN General Assembly 2 weeks ago, and I saw people coming as NGOs with badge from their governments. So that's nice. So you need more effective participation from non-state actors, job creation, and when I say real job creation, suitable jobs, not jobs in the real estate market. They need to go to real green economy to create real jobs for the population. Homegrown science capabilities, so we can have nuclear reactor with technology imported from Korea, with technicians imported from Korea, with the waste exported to Korea. If the regime doesn't change in Korea and they don't allow the waste to go back to Korea. So we need homegrown science to achieve sustainable development. And number 4, we need institutional and public policy capacity building. My third message is about partnerships for development and the role of Arab funds. There are 10 Arab funds, either regional or national, and we still ask people to help us. First, we are calling Arab funds to have sustainable development goals as integral part of their work and to start themselves to attract partnerships with other funds. My fourth message is for Arab governments to adopt a genuine cross-sectoral approach to sustainable development. This entails the integration of climate change considerations in the implementation of the SDGs, mainly based on the water, energy, food nexus. By this, I don't mean just an interministerial committee. Once I wrote an article about supermarket of Arab ministerial panels. They have a lot of them. We want them to have real integration and real results. You know, Ashok. I mean, in the past, when I talked blunt, I was protected by Mustafa Tolba, the late one. Now, Mustafa Tolba left, so I have to protect myself, because my organization is regional. I mean, governments are observer members in it, but they like it that we talk, but sometimes they think we cross the border. So maybe Ashok will protect me now. My fifth message is the following. Now, when we think about Libya, Yemen, Syria, you say now SDGs in 2030, achieving them. I mean, God, in 2030, the best dream they have is to go back to where they were in 2010. But I think we have an opportunity here, because now, as we have this chaos, we are pushing them to integrate sustainable development goals, principles in the rebuilding efforts. As you lost everything, you have the chance to rebuild on the right base. Now, is it that all bad? No. I said we have opportunities. So since years, we are fighting for phasing out subsidies. And the answer we have was, who are you to teach us how to spend our oil and our money? This year, for those of you who follow up, things changed completely in the last few months. Now, subsidies are phased out in most of the GCC countries. They use the term of water pricing. Ashok, what in the Saudi budget of 2016, water pricing? In the past, we were used to be told heretics when we said water pricing. So there are big changes coming on. Imagine that Saudi Arabia now, the king himself, he talks about an oil-free economy in 2020. 4 years. Yeah, so it's good, very positive. This is very positive, and it should be encouraged and praised. Now, just the last comment I have because I'm in the high-level group of the GEO6, and we were fighting for the last month because some authors of the report are backward still, and they don't want to accept. They are more royal than the king, so I used it in the meeting tomorrow that the king himself says this, and they didn't want to accept to have water pricing in UNEP report. I say it is UNEP report, and those who were resisting most, they accept it now. So, there are changes we never dreamt of before. They are positive. The last thing is the following. Now, there is urgent need now to invest in people-centered development, which fosters integration of human rights. Also, some don't like to hear this, including the right to development, and the principle of genuine public participation, accountability, transparency, and non-discrimination. They have to integrate all of those into development goals. And anything behind this will be just continuation of backwardness. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. This was, so we've got about 12 minutes for questions, and this was a really, I wish we had more time. Let me just make a couple of quick comments. So first, I think just sort of looking at, Ashok reminded us, what are the root causes that are stopping us from implementing the Sustainable Development Goals? there's economic, there's institutional, there are others. And then one illustration of that Michael has shown us is resource mismanagement. Look at why was sand taken out? It was at a regulatory gap, but more broadly, if it wasn't valued within its role within that ecosystem or the catchment, then what are the implications of that resource mismanagement? And then Ashok said it's not just that catchment, it's a global scarcity of resources, and you could go through a range of different resources. And then the big question is, can current institutions help to overcome these impediments and transform and move towards implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals? And Helge talked about where the SDGs call for transparent, accountable, and inclusive resources, and gave us examples of how within the European Commission, the European Union, looking at benchmarking, standardization, watchdog regulatory inclusion, role of justice, and others. And even within these developments, are these institutions capable of getting us where we're going to go? Can this UNEP meeting reach the communities and the problems in the communities that we're here to address? And one key reminder of this is the central role of Indigenous peoples. So Paulina said, look, why aren't Indigenous peoples throughout the SDGs? Why aren't there 300 references to Indigenous peoples? And more broadly, Najib said the role of genuine partnerships and non-state actors' participation in this. And what I'll end with, there's many more points on this, but I think one is, I think the cautionary tale that Ashok has reminded us, there's a colleague, Tom Carruthers, at the Carnegie Endowment, has looked at the role of public participation and transparency with the internet. We're seeing now increasing closing of this space, is that now that we use the internet more, intuitively we think there's more avenues for us to be able to communicate with our governments, to affect our governments, and what we're seeing now empirically is that space is now systematically being closed down. And we could look at countries that are doing this, but I think more broadly, the role of major groups to look at how do we communicate and push forward on this implementation. So with that, the floor is open. I saw you, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for all your
Do you want to use the microphone? You can just punch that in front of you. It's a little red button. Yeah,
okay.
good.
Thank you. I'm very concerned, that's why I'm part of this assembly, about where we're going as humanity and also what development means. And although I've been involved with the SDGs, I still don't think that development should be human-based. It should be environment-based, because as long as we are seeing development as that it has to be human-based, we are always going to need more planets to sustain our biggest greeds. And that's one thing that we cannot afford. We're seeing that every day we have more scarcity of resources, and we need to start rethinking what this means. And the other thing is that in order not to leave anybody behind, I think we have to open our minds and understand that there is another ways of living. Not only the way that we're used to living is the right way, or is the way that everybody has to achieve, especially in indigenous territories. The first thing is to guarantee territory and governance, and we have not been able to do that in indigenous territories along the planet. That's why migration happens, not because they don't want to be indigenous or because they want to civilize, but because they don't have resources, they don't have food, their water is contaminated, and so on. So we need to understand that another ways of living are as valid as ourselves, but not the only way. So I think we still have a long way to deal with these things and to rethink what is possible and what is not. Only that way. And the other thing is that we're seeing the discussion about what happened with when you exploit only one resource. But when we see all these documents that are talking about natural capital, what they're doing is focusing on only one resource and not seeing the holistic view. So it's very important to understand what these systemic approaches mean in order to start taking more care of these environments, of these systems that are part of our living systems, and not only as merchandise or capital or whatever other term that we can use it. And it is an effort that I think the world has to change into that path, and not into turning water into another merchandise or air into another merchandise, because there is not enough money in the world to start buying those things. So it's a hard exercise that we all have to do in order to understand really what path do we want to take along. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I wonder if we could take a couple of more comments, please, and then I think we're going to have to watch the time, because I think we're going to have to get out of here at about 5 minutes. So, great, thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Rosanna Marie Neal, and I'm with the Sustainable World Initiative. So Ashok mentioned the idea of changing the economy, and I really love the idea of regenerative economics, which goes to what you were saying, economics that is geared towards regenerating the environment and improving lives, because our current economic model is actually it's decreasing wealth, real wealth. So what do you think it will take to make this idea of regenerative economics mainstream?
Okay, maybe one last question, and I'm going to turn it over to everyone, please. Yeah. 2 more questions. Okay, great. Sir? Yeah. You just press.
My name's Jesse. I represent an organization called the Kenya Climate Change Working Group. I'm actually working in the energy thematic sector. My idea and contribution, I'll just contribute a little bit on the existing and more sustainable programs that are working in Kenya over the last 30 years. I'll give an example of a rural region which has worked, or which has a real life experience. This region covers the region between Central Province and going towards Naivasha, Mai Mahiu, and just below the escarpment. If you look at the region over the last 30 years, before they had some acacia trees with savanna grasslands, but over the years, the region has turned to be more forestry. This has been driven due mainly to the demand for forest products by our emerging industrial area. Most of the industries in the industrial area in Nairobi have changed from the commercial electricity and diesel oil into forest products of wood, which they're consuming in large numbers. Unfortunately, most of our agriculture area has converted their maize and beans production into growing trees, which they harvest over a period of between 5 to 7 years, where they make one lump sum of income, which is sustaining now the industry together with communities. These communities have developed structures, self-help groups, CBOs, NGOs, which are registered within their respective regions, and are also in touch with their county level structures, such as the ward level, the constituency level, and the sub-county level, which also support into small financial packages that help me develop. This real life experience can be implicated elsewhere, and have proved to be working over the last 30 years. Thank you.
Great. So maybe just one last, thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Sasha Gabizon with the Women Major Group. And my question really is also for how do we really create a fair playing field? Because we want those social solidarity enterprises and cooperatives gender equitable, sustainable, which fulfill human rights. But what we of course see is that we have a completely unfair playing field. Yesterday we were discussing about the issues of large investments in CCS, carbon capture, land grabbing, more pressure on resources, pollution through increased use of chemicals, increased use of pesticides, making it even more difficult for these solidarity economic enterprises to survive. And so don't we need a radical change in the way our government legislation gives support? We have already been talking about the subsidies for the fossil fuel industries, but the many other ways in which we give support to unsustainable industries. And is that also something you have already had some proposals on, which we can take to the UNEP, UNEA 2 meeting? Thank you.
Great. So we started a little late, so we can go a couple of minutes over. And maybe we can do is just ask in the same order that we started, just if you could take a minute, minute and a half on anything you've heard and you want to respond to. So Helge, if we could start with you, please.
Thanks very much. There were so many great contributions. It's a bit hard to choose one, but I think one that Ashok mentioned about the lack of looking at the root causes in the development of the SDGs, and it's something that I see again now, and I think it's a huge challenge for anyone who works in the environment area, is that, I mean, now talking about Europe again, everything is occupied by the terrorism situation and by the migration situation, and that plus a bit of the economic situation, in particular in the south of Europe. So these are the three topics, and they tend at the highest political level to push everything aside because we don't have time for environment now, because we need to focus on these crisis issues. And I think this again brings us back to this lack of looking at the nexus, and I think here the link in particular between conflicts and resources that have been mentioned by several today, which lead to migration, which lead to these huge flows of people leaving their land because they don't have livelihoods, because of lack of water, lack of whatever. And at least I can say, unfortunately, we haven't succeeded yet in getting this message better across, that there is a link and that we cannot just address the symptoms of these crises without looking what's underneath. And I think we really have to do this much more. And I think it's a great challenge and one of our biggest tasks ahead, at least. That's what I can say for Europe. Thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Paulina, please.
Absolutely.
You want to pass? Yeah?
Yeah.
You sure? Yeah, okay, great. Michael, please.
Okay, I'd first like to thank everyone for the rich interventions. I started scribbling notes and then I stopped because I just wanted to listen. But first, on the perhaps false dichotomy between eco and human, I think there's a risk in exploiting that dichotomy. And what we have been trying to do in our initiative is to bring eco into the human perspective. So, for example, instead of working on influencing government policy making, legislation, budgets, monitoring, evaluation through ministries of environment, our point of entry is ministries of finance and planning agencies. We are greening those agencies and getting them to take up the values and to monitor and implement the objectives by bringing on board the poverty environment nexus to build gender-sensitive indicators into their own analyses. And we do that by appealing to their better nature. They love evidence. They love evidence-informed research that guides them to do the right things. So we are quantifying. We are doing economics, environmental economics. We're doing social accounting. And for example, on the gender gap in agricultural productivity, we put some hard numbers together with the World Bank on what it costs not to give women farmers the same opportunities that men and farms that are run by both men and women have in East Africa. It costs your economy this much in terms of your productivity. It's taking wealth out of your state to discriminate. Still, that's only partial answer, because we're using the wrong metrics. We know that even such things as the multidimensional poverty index, which is the reform of the reform of the reform of looking simply at aggregate income, is inadequate to capture the value of ecosystem services. So when we talk about what humans value, we need to broaden our perspective and include the environment, include ecosystems in that, and integrate, not to divide and say, this is what people care about on the one side, this is what the ecosystem cares about on the other side. That's a losing political strategy, and it isn't really fair to our own humanity. Our humanity can be much, much broader.
Great, thank you. Ashok.
I think both Helga and Michael answered several of the questions, so I'd like to just add something more to do with the next steps. I see the bulk of the SDGs, almost all of them, 16 of them, as goals, certainly, because that's what they call the Sustainable Development Goals, and the 17th one is sort of a means to it. But for me, there are 3 goals that actually provide the means as well. In fact, they are more means than for achieving all the other goals. And I think we've got to focus on the local implications of trying to fulfill goal number 5, which I see as a means as much as a goal, gender equality, particularly girls with education. That's goal 5 and 4 together, and women with decent jobs, well-paid jobs, which is goal number 5 and 8. The combination of the goal number 5 and 8 become, I think, the means to a better world, not just for the women, but for everyone, and for the future, because they tend to have smaller families, and they address many other second-order, third-order impacts, which are crucial for sustainability. And jobs for women, decent jobs for women, because women do have jobs, but it's just that they don't get paid for it, and they don't have the kind of rewards, psychological rewards from them that they deserve. If you could do those 2 things, delayed marriages, smaller families, working, the issue of bringing in productive capacity, for me, those 3 goals are actually means to actually deliver on all the other ones. And I would really like to see that as the central point of focus for all international, national, and local concern.
Great. Thank you, Najib. Last word is to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say something simple. It might sound controversial. I think achieving sustainable development goals needs a high level of self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency does not mean to produce as much as you want of anything you want. Change your lifestyle. I give simple example. If Egyptians like to eat rice, if at one point there is not enough water to grow rice, just shift to another product which will keep you alive, which needs less water. Also, this is something which they would have killed me if I said some years ago. Now they can listen to. Just we can change our lifestyle to have higher level of self-sufficiency.
Great, so wonderful panel. I wish we had had more time, but please join me in thanking them. Very, very good. Thank you all.
Thank you. Very well moderated. Thanks.